Hello everyone, I'm Adriana Loureiro, a geographer in the research team of Geography at the University of Coimbra, and I'm going to present a study named The Role of Neighborhood Environment on Mental Health, a Strategic Assessment. This work is part of my PhD research. This presentation is divided into 5 parts. Let's begin with an overview on determinants of mental health. Literature and previous research shows that mental health outcomes are influenced by the characteristics of individuals, such as age and gender, and their lifestyles and behaviors, for instance, physical activity and substance use, but also by their family, in which they grow up, being influenced by the family income, for example. Another level with influence on individuals' mental health is the community where they live and belong to. Characteristics such as community involvement and the neighborhood physical and built environment are important in this relationship. Furthermore, the society where they are integrated plays an important role, according to their characteristics, for instance, levels of social participation and gentrification, and also the global ecosystem, where the dimensions of biodiversity and environmental stability can be highlighted. Finally, the digital sphere has also associations with the mental health of the individuals. Specifically, the individual and environmental characteristics influence the behavioral outcomes according to the use of the community resources, the type of mobility adopted, the levels of physical activity, and community interactions and engagement, among other characteristics. These choices and behaviors influence the mental health outcomes, such as mortality, morbidity, incapacity, or well-being. How can we promote mental health and change this chain of relationships? By changing the beginning of a story, one might change the entire story. So it is necessary intervening in the neighborhood environments where people are born and age through policies, planning, and design, and develop knowledge about the determinants of mental health to help the local agents promote the mental health of the community. However, this chain of relationships are more complex, and we can forget the influence of cultural, economic, and geographical context in all of these dimensions that can be challenging, such as macroeconomic trends and globalization. The objective of this study is to strategically assess the neighborhood environmental factors that contribute to mental health promotion in the Lisbon region. In the map, we have the location of Portugal and of the study area in blue, the 4 municipalities in the Lisbon region. To strategically assess the neighborhood environmental factors that contribute to mental health promotion, we use strategic environmental and health assessment methodologies, in particular the strategic thinking for sustainability in strategic environmental assessment developed by Maria do Rosário Partidário. First of all, we identify the neighborhood environmental characteristics that are relevant to the mental health of the population. We apply a questionnaire to the resident population of the 4 municipalities of the study area and collect information regarding the self-assessed mental health status using the Mental Health and Vitality Scale from the Short Form Health Survey, SEF 36, and from other variables of their neighborhood environment. With this information, we conduct several binomial logistic regression models to identify the risk factors of poor mental health. The mental health scale was defined as binary dependent variable and the neighborhood environmental characteristics as independent variables. We calculate the probability of event and the respective confidence intervals to define the risk of poor mental health. Secondly, we define the assessment framework with the identification of the critical decision factors and assessment criteria based on the statistically significant risks to poor mental health, an odd ratio higher than 1. After that, we identify the indicators that correspond to each assessment criterion too. Thirdly, we assess the effect on the mental health of strategic options through the risks and opportunities of each to the promotion of mental health. Let's explore the results. According to 3 groups of neighborhood environment characteristics, physical and built environment, socioeconomic environment, and social and cultural interaction environment, the risk factors of poor mental health identified are the non-satisfaction with the cultural facilities and services in the residence area, the non-satisfaction with the local commerce, with sport facilities and services, with the air quality, and with the urban cleaning, having less than 12 years of education, and not having voted in the last municipal elections. The neighborhood environment characteristics identified between 1.5 times and 2 times more probability of having poor mental health were the non-satisfaction with associative and community facilities and services in the residence area, the non-satisfaction with health services and facilities, being unqualified manual worker, the non-satisfaction with noise indoor levels, having a bad or unknown relationship with neighbors, not being satisfied with the safety of the residence area, having an employed person in the family, health expenses being the main expenses of the household budget, and the non-satisfaction with educational facilities and services. The highest risks, higher than 2 times more probability of having poor mental health, were observed in disliking living in the neighborhood and having no emotional support by family, friends, or neighbors in the social and cultural environment characteristics I mentioned. And in the socioeconomic environment characteristics were having an household income of less or equal than 500 euros, being able to pay correct expenses only, and having difficulty in paying expenses. Based on these neighborhood environment risks factors to poor mental health, we define 4 critical decision factors that constitute the assessment framework. The first is quality of the public space, with 2 assessment criteria, safety and sense of place. This factor intends to assess the access characteristics and elements of the public space that ensure opportunities to make healthy choices, promoting sense of safety, identity and belonging to the place, contact with nature, and social and cultural interaction. The second is the physical quality of the environment, with 3 assessment criteria: air quality, noise in housing, and solid waste and urban cleaning. The objective is to assess the characteristics and elements of the physical and natural environment that support human life, such as air quality and adequate sound levels, and solid waste management and urban cleaning. The third factor is professional qualification and creation of economic activities, with 3 assessment criteria: professional qualification, new economic activities and business initiatives, and employment and labor. The aim of this critical decision factor is to assess the training and qualification opportunities of individuals and local economic dynamics, including lifelong learning, business attractiveness, employment creation, and innovation and entrepreneurship. Finally, we have services and facilities with 6 assessment criteria: health, education, sport, public transportation, associative and community spaces, and local commerce. This critical decision factor intends to assess the offer, access, and quality of services and facilities supporting community activities. Now, I want to show you the indicators that are suggested in each assessment criterion according to each critical decision factor. Let's look at the safety criterion. Inside the quality of the public space critical decision factor, we propose 6 indicators. For instance, crimes recorded by the police and street lighting density. In the sense of place assessment criterion, we name 3 indicators. For example, the abstention in elections to parishes assemblies. In the air quality criterion, inside the physical quality of environmental, 3 indicators are suggested, such as resident population exposed to PM 2.5 concentrations. The noise in housing criterion is made up of 4 proposed indicators, such as the resident population affected by high noise levels. 4 indicators are suggested in the solid waste and urban cleaning criterion. For example, the urban solid waste collected and selectively collected. The professional qualification and creation of economic activities critical decision factor named 4 indicators in the professional qualification assessment criterion. Individuals with 18 and more years old who participated in adult education and training courses is one example. In the new economic activities and business initiatives criterion, 5 indicators are proposed. For instance, the birth and survival of enterprises. 5 indicators integrate the employment and labor criterion. For example, the employment evolution and the self-employed workers. In the last critical decision factor related with services and facilities, in the health criterion, 5 indicators were defined regarding the population living within 15 minutes walking from primary health care, for instance. 4 indicators are proposed in the education criterion, such as the early leavers from education and training. Inside the sport criterion, 3 indicators were suggested, like the participants in the sport activities. The public transport criterion presents 3 indicators regarding population living within 15 minutes walking from a public transportation stop. For example, in the associative and community spaces, we propose 4 indicators related with affiliated individuals of local association by association typology, for instance. Finally, 2 indicators were named in the local commerce assessment criterion: commercial establishments density and the average time to nearest commercial establishments. In this part of the presentation, I'm going to give you 2 examples of assessment of effects of strategic planning options on population's mental health, analyzing the risks and opportunities to promote mental health. Considering the critical decision factor of quality of public space and the policy, improvement of the availability of public spaces, and the strategic option of trees planting, creation of resting places, and installation of benches, there is the opportunity to increase the sense of safety in the safety criterion, and to promote the social and cultural interaction in the sense of place criterion. Another example of strategic option is the creation of green corridors and green spaces. In the safety criteria, there is an opportunity or a risk to increase or decrease the sense of safety according to the green space characteristics. For example, considering the illumination and the vegetation density of the green spaces. In the sense of place criterion, there is the opportunity to promote contact with nature, healthy choices, for example, the practice of physical exercise, social and cultural interaction, and the sense of identity and belonging. Another example that can be shown is policy promotion of active soft modes of mobility, considering the strategic option of enlarged sidewalk space and walking and cycle lines, avoiding road crossing. There is the opportunity to increase the safety levels through the reduction of running overs, for instance, and the risk of increasing the conflicts between the space users in the safety criterion. In the sense of place criterion, there is the opportunity to promote the social and cultural interaction and the healthy choices like walking and cycling. The final notes are around the importance of the neighborhood environment. This study points out that the application of methodologies of strategic and environmental and health assessment to promote mental health allows to inform and support the local planning decision-making processes with the strategic considerations on neighborhood environmental characteristics, and to highlight the important role to be played by the local governments in designing public healthy policies that are holistic, multi-level, intersectorial, and community-based. Thank you. If you have any question, contact me.
Hello, it's a pleasure for me to be here. It's a pity that we couldn't be together this year, but it's very nice that we have this opportunity to share some knowledge or some ideas in this presentation and all the others. So thank you for the opportunity, and thank you for those who are watching. My name is Mariana Santos. I am a professor doctor at Unicamp at the University of Campinas. We are in Brazil, São Paulo. I work in this School of Civil Engineering, Architecture and Urban Design. And this presentation I'll give you here shows part of a project, presents part of a project that was funded by FAPESP. So you also have this information here. And the topic is from regional planning to local projects, designing green infrastructures, which is part of this biggest project. So this introduction is not exactly the introduction I would write or something like this, but the introduction of the idea that I try to keep following during my work, even in my classes, and the way of thinking. So the central idea that I try to present here is that we should start always, or try to always start from a broader concept or from a broader view or something bigger to reach the specific ones. So in my vision, in my idea, this would help things to be more connected or more or better included in the other things that already exist. So in this case, the central idea is to start from a broader concept or view until we look into these small pieces. Pieces we can understand as smaller concepts or projects, if we link it to plan or something like this. And the second most relevant idea would be to integrate things, integrate sectors, integrate perspectives. In this case, with the focus in improving urban planning practice. I have to say that this presentation and what I will discuss here is more concentrated in the Brazilian context, because we still have a lot to learn and to improve in our planning cities and planning processes in general. So we have plans, but they still need to be improved. So from this broader concept that we use in this project, in these ideas, I'll talk about nature-based solutions, which are inspired and supported by nature, that must be cost-effective and provide environmental, social, and economic benefits. Besides this, promote resilience to cities and bring these natural processes and features to cities, to urban areas mainly. Trying to renature something and trying to finding natural experiences and aspects, also solutions to our problems, to our daily life. So, under this big concept that is related to nature-based solutions, this can be called as an umbrella concept related to ecosystem-related approaches. So under this big umbrella, we have other smaller concepts, going to the first idea, going back to that first idea, that can be ecosystem-based adaptation or ecosystem-based mitigation, eco-disaster risk reduction, natural climate solutions, and others, including green infrastructure. Probably in other sessions, people are talking about others, any other of these ecosystem-related approaches. But in this case, I'm going to put light into the green infrastructure topic. Why, actually? GI made me think some years ago that this can be a very interesting solution or a very interesting thing to integrate in our planning processes, mainly when you live in very gray and cold cities, not very cold in Brazil, but I mean when you don't have this green and this natural aspects to make you feel better, to make you feel healthier, mainly mentally speaking. So when I got in touch with this concept, this green infrastructure concept, which was some years ago in the Netherlands and something like this, when I realized that this put some bigger plans and national visions and something like this, and go into the smaller pieces of it, go into provincial and municipal levels of plan. So, okay, this was nice, but they are also a very small country. So since then, I started thinking, how can we try to work with something like this here in Brazil? Also, we have our challenges here in planning. Well, going back a little bit, GI, green infrastructure, has some characteristics and benefits. Sorry for any mistake. So, and one of the main aspects it presents is the connectivity. And I think this is the key. This is the most important part we have to think about when we try to plan a green infrastructure to propose something. So besides this, it's also capable of fulfilling environmental, social, and economic functions, like I said before, related to NBS. Green infrastructure is also able to provide some ecosystem services, like provide flood, improve air quality, regulate climate, provide spaces for cultural and physical activities. Many of them, they are not monofunction, yeah. They can work in this very different sets in the same place, in the same project. So it seems to be a very interesting opportunity. And it also has something specific that is not related only to the connectivity, but also to the scales it can be planned and worked with. So you can look at it from a regional perspective, a national perspective, depending on the size of the nation you are talking about, of the country you're talking about. And in this sense, it also has shows the opportunity of connecting urban and rural areas, which if I think about Brazil, we also have this very disconnected way of thinking. Rural is left and behind, and urban areas are more important, or the eyes are on it. So, and GI also has another thing that if we first think about this connected network, we may think about nature, only natural elements, but then if we think that this connectivity cannot be lost, and if you go to urban areas, we have to think that maybe inside urban areas, we have to work with also other structures, built structures, not only nature, okay? So we have these two types of opportunities, of types of projects. We can include nature areas like riparian vegetation, urban reforestation, natural parks, urban parks, which are not usually so natural, but okay. But we can also work with wetlands, built wetlands, green walls, green roofs, and depending on the scale we are looking at it, we have different opportunities of working with GI. This is a bit old picture, but it shows this opportunity of putting these different elements together. So, as I started learning about it from the Dutch case, if we look at the European Union case in general, most of the countries have incorporated this NBS in general, ideas and concepts in most of the European Union policy priorities. And also these high-level policies and plans, they provide this opportunity of each country incorporate these ideas into their own systems and adapt to this. But Concerning GI, the green infrastructure, European Union has two main directives, birds and habitats, that promoted the selection of the Natura 2000 network, which are sites based on this directive, selected based on these directives, and then they are met, looking at the whole European Union countries, and then each country goes and look at it from a closer perspective. So it can go bigger than before. So, and these guidelines, these general guidelines, they are usually included in the spatial plans and also in land use plans if we go to the municipal level. Okay, this would be an example. We here have a big country which would be more or less the same of the Europe itself in size. So if we look at the green infrastructure experience in Brazil, there is very few to find. So in theory, we have more or less some research going on over it from different perspectives. I should highlight this. But in practice, we find very isolated projects. Most of them, someone from the private sector that had to pay something to compensate something or to do something better related to a project they are working on. So it's not, there is not this idea of the connectivity. It's like there is lack of connectivity. And also the public policy, they are not focusing in this green infrastructure yet. We find it mentioned in some municipal plans, but it's still very superficial in my vision and in some research we have done. And also, I always pay attention to this point of the connectivity. And if we look, they are almost always related to the urban area, but then they don't look to the rural areas. And then where is this connectivity? Because, okay, I'm talking about these two parts of a municipality, but a municipality is not alone. They have neighbors, let's say like this. And this connectivity should be should go through these limits of the municipality. So we have these problems here. Not GI is not a solution used here yet. So we have some challenges and some opportunities to implement it here. Once we have our municipal master plans, which are our basic plans for most of our municipalities, it's mandatory for those municipalities with more than 20,000 inhabitants. Smaller cities don't have a municipal master plan. It's a pity. This planning tool, let's say like this, comes from a very straight, that I say the urban perspective, which doesn't have the same look at the environmental aspects if it was not built under this perspective. It's more related to social aspects, to housing, to mobility, and these things. So as an opportunity, if we have these plans, and they are getting better, because they are mandatory since our last constitution, which was in the 80s. So I think they are quite young and they are getting better. People that work with them are learning more and getting more multidisciplinary people working on them. But if we look at this, okay, it's still a problem, but also an opportunity. So if we look at this plan as presenting guidelines of land uses to the municipalities, and if we recognize that they're able to look at the different sectors and put the different sectors guidelines into one plan, into one document, we already have this plan, but we have to improve it, let's say like this. Also, we should promote a more better connection around urban and rural areas, because I already said they're still quite separate under the planning system. On the other hand, the municipal master plan, which is defined by our urban policy, it has some friends, let's say like this, that are always also other tools that can make people, force people to follow what the municipal master plan is saying, including or not including money, including or not including rules about building, how you can occupy the land and something like this. So you have this opportunity to put things together to work in this sense. But we have to improve. We have to make a better connection between this municipal master plan and other plans, mainly those that come from the regional perspective, which are, most of them are related to environmental planning and policies. So I picked up some three of these main policies, which present some plans from the regional scale, which are related to the national environmental policy and the Ecological-Economic Zoning decree, which will be the topic of this the following speech. Our national water resources policy, related to the river basin plan and the river basin area regional, and the national system of conservation units, where we find the protected areas. Most of them have some plans, or they should have also plans, and they should be connected to each other, but this is still this policy doesn't work with this connection itself. It just gives the regulation for these protected areas. So I'm going to talk about this Ecological-Economic Zoning, or EEZ, because it's closer to the municipalities if they consider the EEZ. Why I say if? Because they should be prepared by the states. Not all the states have prepared it yet. Some of them prepared, but then we have some problems. The time the EEZ was finished, and the time the master plan, the municipal master plans were prepared. So sometimes we have this disconnection, which is also a challenge. So, but going back to the EEZ, it has some main definition and goals, which are, it's a spatial plan to be followed by plans, programs, and projects. This is the main idea, public and private. So if you go to the licensing process, it should be key in this, central in this topic, but we still have some problems on it, and should be built including public participation. So if this EEZ is well prepared, we already know that people agreed with it, or at least discussed it. It's not only made by technical, from the technical perspective. And it has some goals like defining patterns of environmental protection. And this is focusing on soil, water resources, biodiversity in general, and to promote economic development compatible with sustainability. This is one of the main, okay, we have to develop, we are an underdevelopment country, so, but how can we do it without finishing everything, destroying everything or something like this? To establish guidelines for nature resources uses, so there's a limit and how can we do it? And to indicate land uses according to identified potentialities and vulnerabilities of the area. This is very important because, okay, I want to do some development or to change this land use, but what I'm planning to do doesn't fit to this area. So, or in this area, my negative impacts are going to be bigger and than if I did the same thing in another place. So this would be the role of this plan. It's built considering some physical and biological aspects of the environment, the existing and expected land use, and also includes some rules and guidelines related to other policies. It will work with scenarios and something like this. But only to give you some examples, when I talk about rules and guidelines from other policies, the first code, we have also this first code, which says that we have these permanent preservation areas, that they must be there. They are, most of the time we find them linked to this, to the rivers, to the riparian vegetation. But there are other examples of it, as we can see in these pictures. And there is also this legal reserve area, which we find only in rural areas and rural properties, where the owner have to save and to do nothing, let's say like this, in 20% of the native vegetation of the property. So if we can start planning, considering all this nature that must be left, we already are able to design or to start designing some connectivity, only using our regulation. And the EEZ will put this in maps and overlap it with other topics and aspects of the environment and of development. So EEZ also identifies and proposes ecological corridors, mainly trying to link these protected areas, those from the forest code and those from the protected area systems. But it also points out, or is able to point out, new areas to be protected, areas to develop specific activities and land uses, and areas where not to develop these specific activities and land uses, or you can do it here, you shouldn't do it here, do that there, and okay. It points out the better choices for these developments. And these interventions, these projects are related to different sectors of the society. It can be related to agriculture, to industries, to sanitation projects, or something like this. It also, EEZ also carries a capacity and the opportunity to design this green infrastructure from this wider point of view. So if we look at the state, if it's prepared, looking all the whole state, it can start designing this big green infrastructure. And then, if we have a state with all the municipalities, and the municipalities look at this big green infrastructure designed by the state, by this scale of planning, and then they go and look into these guidelines and to these sites pointed in it. Some of them already guided by other policies, some of them pointed by the EEZ, and the studies it took into account. And then we go to the municipal scale and look at the territory from a closer perspective, and then we can enlarge this green infrastructure proposal. And we can also discuss it with people. We are closer, if we look to this green infrastructure proposal from the municipal level, we can deal with people who are able to implement it, to take care of it, to pay for it, and then to negotiate it, which there are many aspects to implement it that are necessary to negotiate. But we have some questions, some other questions, some challenges. That EEZ is a very expensive plan to be prepared because of the size and the amount of information it needs to be prepared. There is this different difference of time that I already talked about from the municipal plans and this regional plan. Sometimes they state, and the environmental, sometimes or almost always, the environmental perspective, which is the essence of the EEZ, sometimes goes to a different direction that the municipality is trying to go if we look from the municipal perspective, because one of them is looking more for protection, for environmental protection, trying to save the resources and something like this. And the other one is looking for developing the city, new developments, changing land uses, but making the city richer and these things that we already know. So putting these things together, putting these different ideas together in the same place is a very big challenge, but it will depend on how people that work with planning and work with city management and something like this understand the role that GI can play in the city, not only in the urban area but also in the rural area, and the benefits it can bring to the municipality and for the people and for nature and for the not only for people, it goes further than this. But there is also this challenge of not only those who prepare the plan, who understand the concepts, who propose it in the plan, but those who will make it happen. And then we have the landowners and this thing of this big GI, this green infrastructure, passing through private and public areas, and then we have to negotiate. So it's not only about planning it, but also about implementing it. But we have to start from somewhere. And here we still have to start in how planning it. And if we have this planned and designed, if someone has the idea of implementing a project, if there's some money or some compensation about something, they already know where to invest or where to work in this project, and not, okay, let's go to the city and see where we can do something. So I think this is the most important idea of looking from a wider view and going to the detail, trying to make this with conversation, with understanding of those the stakeholders and everyone related to it, and then we have to change this in our way of planning and implementing policies here. So I think this was the idea, the message. I hope you liked it. If you have any questions, this is my email, mariana@fec under unicub.br. And thank you for watching this. I hope it helped you somehow to think about something. And if you have any question or suggestion, please send me a message. Hope to see you next year. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Varalakshmi Vemuru. I'm a practice manager for social sustainability and inclusion global practice at the World Bank. I'm currently working in the Europe and Central Asia region. Prior to this, I was a lead operations specialist working in the Africa region with almost 20 years experience on community-driven development. Today, I wanted to introduce the concept of local economic development for community-driven development, LED for CDD, to all of you. My outline for the presentation would be to introduce the concept of LED, that is local economic development, then talk about the evolution of CDD and LED projects, especially in the World Bank's portfolio, and then to present a few ideas around CDD LED framework. So what is LED? The World Bank defines LED as a process by which public, business, and non-governmental sectors partner collectively to create better conditions for economic growth and employment generation. It's about coming together of the public sector, the private sector, the people's sector, in order to create the environment wherein people can get jobs and employment. Let's look at the two concepts of LED and CDD. The focus of LED is on income generation and job creation. It requires a market-based approach wherein we look at the economic analysis of the most predominant sectors in a given area and look at the value chains, both in the agriculture and non-agriculture sectors, that provide the potential for the locality to create jobs. This requires a dialogue with the private sector to identify the potential, the constraints in leveraging this potential, and also the actions that would be required to promote local value chains. Now, what is CDD? The focus of CDD in many contexts has been mostly on the social sectors, supporting education, health, small infrastructure, and in some cases, small livelihoods, that is at the subsistence levels. And the information that actually informs the CDD approach is basically community prioritization, the way they see their potential and their prospects. It seeks to primarily focus on bringing in the most vulnerable, the excluded, into the developmental fold, and also to help them identify their needs and support. So LED is essentially a type of territorial development, right? It takes a spatial lens so that one could identify what the potential in that spatial area is, or that geography is, for creating jobs and for economic development. It offers the local governments, the subnational entities, tools by which they could plan and implement these investments based on this analysis of the local potential, constraints, and opportunities. It then results in what one could call a coordinated strategy that then works at the infrastructural level, the institutional level, and the interventions level. Now, I just want to take you on the journey of how CDD LED projects in the World Bank have evolved. This is the projects that have been supported by the World Bank across the globe. An analysis of the World Bank supported operations shows that it's a longer spectrum, right? It differs, especially in the context of livelihoods, it really differs a large deal among the various regions. So at the lower end of the spectrum are community-based livelihoods, that is at the subsistence level, where people are just able to have enough incomes to meet their basic needs. The next level of evolution has seen projects that are much more informed by the market, but cover a smaller geography. They're intra-village or inter-village operations. Now, when we look at CDD and LED, you're talking about much larger scale of livelihoods where value chains have been leveraged. It needs a territorial planning. And there's an intervention between livelihoods, the investments in livelihoods and people's skills and abilities, but also the infrastructure that allows for leveraging this potential. For instance, there is increase in production, but then there's also investment in the infrastructure that allows for the processing, right, of any commodity, the storage, the market linkages, the roads, and including investments in the markets themselves. The later generation of projects have brought in the digital, right? And in the COVID and post-COVID era, the use of digital technology and platforms to support local economic development is even more pivotal. Let's look at what the conceptual model for CDD and LED is. We're looking at community platforms of community institutions and their interaction at two levels. One, with the government that is actually implementing projects. In the case of the World Bank, the government is the implementing agency. And at the other side, we have the markets or the private sector, right, that enable the leveraging of the potential and the value chains. Now, one is looking at a couple of outcomes in this interaction between the CDD and LED approaches. You're looking at empowerment, voice, and agency where the poor community is concerned. There is the support mechanisms in terms of resource people, resource institutions, and resource persons who will work with the communities. There is the investments in the supporting infrastructure, technology platforms, digital investments, skills, capacity, and very importantly, access to finance. Now, the approaches that have evolved in the CDD and LED model have been on spatial and territorial development, collaborations with both the private and public sector, leveraging innovations and partnerships, looking at evidence, right? Both curating and creating the models based on monitoring, good monitoring, and using that data to evolve models and build on them. And most importantly, using community platforms to not just for economic outcomes, but also human capital development, which is very necessary when we are looking at the next generation. Now, when you look at a typical operational model, I mean, often the question is, how does this look on the ground? So at the bottom, you have the community platforms, right? The community institutions. And then from a territorial perspective, you have a sub-national entity, a district, a county, which is the unit of implementation. Now, typically, the investments are in understanding the priority economic activities, the support for that to be converted into a business, into an enterprise, including business skills, livelihoods training, information, exposure, business plan development. And then with that is the technical support, technical assistance coming from resource agencies, the infrastructure investments coming from the government, and partnership with the financial institutions. So people are brought together into livelihood groups, and then there is collaboration with other similar organizations, the savings and credit access, strategic investments, and establishment of linkages with the private sector and private players and the market. So there is an aggregation with these investments from livelihood groups to producer groups and livelihood collectives, where the CDD platform of community institutions based on the social and economic capital is then leveraged to have a much higher gain in both incomes and returns on investments. So just to clarify and to again elaborate on the CDD and LED framework. So at the stage one, you have the individual and small group approach where community-based livelihoods with very limited interventions or interactions with the markets are put together, right? So they're not market focused, they're very small income-based activities and very inward looking. And then you have a stage two where you're looking at intra-village level, right? This is pretty market driven. The linkages with the market, with the infrastructure and value chains, right? So there is an emergent market focus. You're looking at small scale livelihood activities going beyond individuals with increased income generation. And even in the market-driven livelihood activities and community-led livelihood activities, you see a gradation of greater comprehensiveness and a greater focus on the market. You have a stage three where you're looking beyond the intra-village or inter-village to a more regional and cluster level. And this is the CDD LED approach, which is more territorial, which is based on leveraging value chains, which is based on also looking at infrastructure linkages to both increase the extent to which the value chains are leveraged on the shelf life of products, the distance some of these products are able to travel. So therefore, you're looking at both the near but also the far markets. So a comprehensive market focus, a territorial approach, And going from there to much more comprehensive LED programs, looking at integrating a whole advanced set of features for projects. And of course, the last stage in this journey is the globally integrated. So you look at where the digital platforms become very important, where all the values of community institutions, of building on the local potential, but a market responsive approach, and well integrated with innovations and digital technology, is when this whole model comes to fruition and helps in leveraging it to the largest extent. So just in conclusion, I would like to state that the LED approach essentially focuses on income generation and job creation to promoting the economic potential of a territory, right? It's a much larger frame of thinking, but it also builds on the community institutions platform, the voice, the agency, the empowerment that a CDD program allows for. So projects that kind of merge the CDD and LED approaches then have three key focus areas, right? They focus on a territory, they link the poor to value chains and to its complete potential, but they also bring in other interventions, including infrastructure, that allow the leveraging of the value chains to a much greater extent. Of course, also by making investments in human capital skills, which then creates the next generation to be much more robust and to be able to reach new heights. So thank you very much for your attention.
Good morning. I am delighted to be here to give you a presentation on defining a model of governance for impact assessment. This is part of my ongoing research work, and I thought I would share these with you. These are the objectives of the presentation. I want to explore the definition of governance, look at the dimensions of governance. I want you all to consider governance space and the conceptual model where governance has been applied. And then we can look at governance in the work that we do as impact assessment specialists, and how we need to look at a holistic view of governance in impact assessment. The World Bank has defined governance as the manner in which power is exercised in the management of a country's economic and social resources for development. The key term here is the manner in which power is exercised, not necessarily the outputs or the outcomes, but the manner in which power is exercised. For a long time, people have considered governance as synonymous with government, but this is far from the truth. When we do that, we ignore the sovereign state. This also ignores the political and social issues and drivers in decision making. And there's very little focus on informal institutions outside of government. And really what we look at is a normative view of governance or government governance. We also need to recognize that there are political and social drivers in governance. And international organizations have actually shaped the way governance is measured. The main focus is on democratic institutions and market economies. The focus tends to be on structure of institutions in terms of capacity to implement, enabling laws, transparency, and financial accountability if it's a loan. The other dimensions, however, are ignored. And the question is, what are these dimensions? UNESCAP defined governance into eight areas. Transparency, in terms of information about the project and information generally. Responsiveness of the actions. How did we arrive at this? Is it consensus oriented? Is it equitable, and were there mechanisms for inclusion in terms of decision making? How effectively would this project be? How efficient would it be? And how effectively would it be carried out? Do the institutions have the capacity? What about accountability in terms of financial accountability, but also accountability in a general sense to people who are the stakeholders? Then there's a burning question of participatory dimension, where people may not feel that they have participated enough, and it brings into all these issues about different types of participatory approaches. And of course, rule of law. What's the context for all of this? When we look at governance space, we look at the area where governance occupies. However, we must consider the sovereign state, which must always be the basis for inquiry and a reference point. Now, the sovereign state is long-term, like in any country, that is long-term. And that concerns all institutions, the norms, the practices, the laws of all the people. Governments operate within a sovereign state. And certainly with the type of political system, you have different types of control that is exercised. Now, government, when they elected, exercise control through the governance space that they occupy, to the institutions, the ministries, the laws that they implement, and that sort of thing. But there are other spaces within the sovereign space where government has very little reach. And therefore, these spaces are outside of the governance of government governance. Or there may be areas which are overlapping. And these usually overlap with informal and other institutions, including political entities. And we need to consider this when we consider governance space. Now, I'm going to focus on the manner in which power is exercised. If you go back to theory of organization and Philip Selznick way back in 1948, his theory is still sound today. And what really it is that we must look at organizations as embedded in an institutional matrix, where you have an action system, which is what we usually see. We see the people, and we see the power structure in terms of the structure of the organization. So when we look at this, we look at the rules and the functions. But beneath this formal structure, you have processes. And however, this formal structure has really a duality with an informal social structure that is quite adaptable. And really, it's the interaction of the formal structure and the informal adaptive social structure that gives the organization existence. Now, our focus on organizational structure tends to be the principal focus on governance evaluation and impact assessment. However, the formal structure, not just the action system, but the formal structure and its duality, is usually ignored. And therefore, when you do such analysis, it's like evaluating a plumber or a mechanic or any of these crafts, and say, look, we will evaluate this person by looking at his tools and what he says we can do. And really, that is very limited, very myopic. There is always a missing dimension when we look at governance. And really, there tends to be a normative view of governance from institutions, from international institutions, because they don't want to get involved in political and social issues. But it's always in the background, and they say it, that something is missing. The politics or the social issues affect the legitimacy of what is happening. So in other words, it's often alluded to, but it's actually ignored a lot of times. Now, mixed methods research has advanced over the last 20, 30 years. And really, this can actually be a method in terms of how we examine these dimensions, which has both political and social dimensions. And this is really the focus of my own research in community-based governance in informal housing. Now, when we talk about legitimacy, we can explain this in terms of political actions or sovereign state actions. And really, it's a driving force behind the power in governance, and the manner in which power is utilized. It can explain why bad decisions are made. And you'll find that when bad decisions are made, the stakeholders may say, well, look, this is good governance because we are okay with these decisions. So it can explain that. It can, however, be used to examine sovereign space rather than governance space. The model which I propose is as follows, that you see it here in this slide. You see the outer, which is really the matrix of all the political and social capital within the state sector. You have the government institutions level of government. We have the macro, at the macro level, the cabinet. Then you have the ministries and institutions. And then you have, outside of that, you have the existing governance space for whatever issue it is, maybe housing or whatever it is. And then you may find new spaces which are created by governments which may be invited or cursed government spaces. And when we look at governance, we look at all the dimensions within all of that, within the whole sovereign state matrix. So you see, what I have here extends beyond government governance, but goes into the state, the sovereign state. So you have transparency, you have responsiveness, consensus with all what I've talked about before. And then you have cutting across all of that legitimacy that goes through everything from both the sovereign state, the government, and how we look at governance. Now, let's look at the governance and impact assessment. Many times when we come into the picture, decisions are already made in terms of the scope of the project, the choice of contractors, contracts have been signed for works, and we are asked to do impact assessments, which are established in law or policy with set terms and budgets for all sorts of things. We are already part of the problem. We have not added any value in terms of governance, and really we are supporting the existing governance in impact assessment. When we consider the wider approach which I've shown here, it forces us to say, look, we need to rewrite the terms of reference for assessments. And that would allow for a more holistic view of impact assessment. So in other words, the existing practice needs to be written in this framework where it will bring in all these issues of climate change, indigenous rights, women's rights, all these other things can be brought in quite easily. And international organizations which have actually been the ones which have led the approach in how governance assessment is done need to look at this broader approach. This will lead to better designed programs with more favorable outcomes. We also need to examine the context for participation. Participation is a big thing in assessment, and it's actually one part of the governance issue. When we look at it, we should look at it in terms of Einstein's ladder of participation, and it tells a lot. What we see as participation is really an outcome of the governance that we have. And we need to look at these interactions, the interactions in sovereign space, because we are all responsible. We all have a role to play in our own space in terms of how we operate. We need to recognize that political capital exercised by political parties in government, when they effect governance, can actually undermine social capital. And we know social capital is the basis for community development and community involvement. So when political capital undermines social capital, we have a fall off in terms of community engagement. And we ask, well, why does this happen? And we need to examine it in this context. So therefore, we need to consider the interactions of all the space actors in the sovereign space and what gives legitimacy in action. I'll give an example of squatter regularization in Trinidad, where squatters on state lands have applied for an occupation license called a certificate of comfort, and that's within the law. There are two major political parties in Trinidad, and the state institution that operates within the law that gives out the certificate of comfort was established by law, that same law, to give these squatters these rights. But it is under the control of the government, and by extension the political party. Now the institution itself has been hailed as success in its actions over the last 20 years. But if you look at the outputs and the time frame, you can draw your own conclusions, which I'll show you here. You see, this is the certificate of comfort approved from 1999 to 2010. And you see it goes there in terms of the amounts over time. However, if you superimpose political parties when they were in power, and the yellow is one party, the red is another party, you see something here. And you can come to your own conclusions when there were lows and highs. You can look at it. Now, when you look at legitimacy, you could have legitimacy of poor governance. When there are change in governments, the community-based organizations themselves, they change. We need to recognize that. A lot of them align themselves with government. And sometimes other community-based organizations decline when governance space of governments are quite big. People lose interest in participation. In Trinidad, we have noticed once the law came in, the law for squatter regularization, before the law, there were a lot of community-based organizations, a lot of organizations. However, as the law came in, there was a steep decline in the number of institutions until now. For now, there are very few community-based organizations which look at at housing issues, and these have been lost. Concluding remarks. Governance is not an abstract concept as I've shown here. It is driven by political and social forces. We need to recognize all dimensions of governance, and whether we operate as international organizations, professional impact assessment specialists, even people in government, we need to look at all these dimensions to make better decisions. This will make assessments more meaningful and more effective. And at the end, we are striving for better governance. Okay? Thank you. Please feel free to make comments. I hope you all have enjoyed and understood what I've said. I can be contacted at wchuggins@yahoo.com. Thank you. God bless you all.